Hello everyone. We are a very, very pivotal, intense, and yet promising time in our lives. And there's no doubt that our living arrangement and our urban planning future is going to change in the coming years and decades. This pandemic has shown that a lot of things are possible, and we have been moving to a different direction. We are seeing that not only the inner cities, the suburbs, and the rural areas are experiencing some level of change and friction. Many of you believe that somehow that the cities are going to be obsolete. Everybody's going to want to live in the suburbs or in the rural areas. There's practically too much crime, corruption. There's no need to live in the cities because people can work at home. I somewhat disagree. Yes, I believe the cities will contract. However, I think and I hope that many of the benefits of the inner cities aren't going to necessarily die out, especially in the outskirts neighborhood, which is what I'm really planning to do. Now, this organization, Strong Towns, has made a lot of good articles and a lot of good points regarding urban planning. I don't necessarily trust the organization. You got to be concerned. You got to be wise about who these people potentially are. You don't know if they're controlled opposition, but they make a lot of good arguments. This article, they talk about this is the end of suburban experiment. Now, many of these people aren't necessarily anti-suburb. You can see here, this is the transit that they support, so they do have a suburban zone. And I'm not necessarily anti-large lot single family home. I do believe that some people want to drive fast on a highway. Everybody has their own preferences. But what we've had in the last several decades is a few size fits all approach, like you have to live in a car dependent area where you have to rely on a car and everything you need to go, you're separated from your land uses, or you can just live in an inner city stacked on top of each other. Very expensive, lots of corruption, crime issues, all these other different factors. And this is somehow the choice that we have when it comes to living. As George Carlin says, in this society, we don't have real choice. We have the illusion of liberty. Well, it's time to really change that. But when they mean suburban experiment, as well as myself, I'm really focused on the land use layout and how the streets are designed. There's been numerous articles in the recent weeks explaining how the pandemic has bolstered demand to spread out suburban living. The supposed insight that fed up, tight living conditions, extended quarantine, and liberated work instead of commute in an office, more Americans will opt out to dream of single-family home ownership in a large lot in a suburb. They will have their own isolated space, safe from infection, and free to live out their lives in prosperity. This is a ludicrous interpretation of current events, one that believes not only the facts out to the ground, but the situation that American finds themselves in. The suburbs are not about to have a renaissance. In fact, there are many reasons to believe that we're nearing the end of the entire suburban experience. So like I've mentioned before, that the suburbs and the urban areas, they're both going to have some level of contraction or change. Not to mention, since this article has been produced about a year ago, gas prices have gone up. And a lot of people have not forgot the events several years ago, 2008, even until 2014, when oil prices finally collapsed. And by the way, a lot of people say, well, we can just drive electric. Look, there can be disruptions in the energy sector, coal, natural gas, so-called alternatives. They all have a lot of impacts on the environment. Even that is not necessarily the whole rescue saver. I have chosen my words carefully here because what is ending is not merely sprawling suburbs, though they've passed their peak, but their entire experimental pattern of urban, suburban, and rural development prototyped in the North American continent in the 20th century. And by the way, these problems have actually spread in Europe, East Asia, the Gulf states, various areas, even south of the border. Our attempts to prop it up have failed, and I don't think we're going to be capable of going back, even if we have a broad consensus to do so. The end of big. Thousands of years, humans have built their habitat on improvement. Neighborhood began modestly, and as more and more humanity came together, grew incrementally in relation and underlining land values. This resulting pattern of development was adaptable, expandable, and productive. The cities were strong. Many civilizations, even my ancestors, when we built Persepolis, Esfahan, Tabriz, much of that was like that. That began to change, as this article has talked about, after the 1920s. So a lot of these people are favoring the return of more traditional values. And it's not just, of course, family and a lot of different issues I've talked about. Race, it's also urban planning and architecture. Not all the changes were beneficial. We have embraced a new development pattern. In a generation, we've centrally directed the transformation of an entire continent, ideas developed largely by our European intellectuals. We've begun to build habitat of large blocks, so large-scale single-use zoning, resulting in a pattern that was easily replicable and easily transacted. The North American development plans sacrifice adaptability and productivity. It became fragile. As we've described for many, many years, the North American development pattern is brilliant in creating a near-term growth. So this is the best visual presentation. The mature city, the vertical and horizontal overexpansion. So this is kind of like many major metropolitan areas across the country. A lot of people love high rises. A lot of people love spread out development. I guess they kind of do that because they fear of slums. They just believe that they want to do things very classy. So it's classy to live in a high rise. It's classy to spread out. And this is an organic expansion to duplication. And honestly, I truly believe that we can do a mixture of these two. We can have high rises, we can have spread out development, and we can have the ones that are in the middle. And I'm going to show you these future designs of mine later on. Now, the suburban experiment, bad for pandemics. So as people are moving out to the suburbs, the question is, we can have our single family home, but can we have many of the benefits of the city? This is a plan in historic Charleston. As you know, if you're subscribed to my channel, I visited historic Charleston about 6 months ago. Made videos about it, as well as Savannah, just a beautiful, beautiful city. I've told you guys this before in a few videos ago. If we would have built our cities like Charleston and Savannah, maybe the gasoline shortage we just had wouldn't have been as so problematic, and we can still have our single family units. You can see here lots of detached units. You can see many of the benefits of the city. You're able to be very close to one another. By the way, the suburbs, or the modern urban planning system, really has the negatives of the rurals and the cities in one package. This one, you get your space and you get a lot of things close together. You get a mixed amount of activities. Now notice here, not only the streets are interconnected, you will find that the buildings look very similar. Single family homes and the places of shopping and working or lounging look very similar. This is essentially the Charleston block. We can go down here. Now this is pretty much a contrast to, obviously, what many of these infill projects have done. They've built parking right in the center, especially super tall parking structures, which they call the Texas Donut. Really, if I were to plan something and if I had to put parking, I would probably make it very hidden. I would cover it up. I wouldn't make it into a structure. I'd probably make it underground. So now you can have some housing even inside the block. You can get practically more dollars or residents or whatever per square foot. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, maybe the rurals are the place to be because people are moving to the rurals. They want to get away from the corruption. They have better, more effective government. There's more traditional values. Women are more likely to get married in their low 20s. I once was with a woman who was from Winnemucca, and she was going to get married around 25. So there's still pretty good a number of these women out there. And Is vertical farming the future of agriculture? Because we think, okay, we can move to the farms, grow our own food, but wait a second. If we can grow the foods in our cities, in skyscrapers, in warehouse type buildings, underground, where formerly there were parking structures. Now I'm going to get to this article later on. We can actually, believe it or not, grow foods which require less pesticides, less labor, which can have an impact on immigration levels, less emissions because all the cost of tractors, transporting, processing, a lot of different things. Because the Central Valley of California has a lot of pollution. Keep that in mind. Not to mention less water, less pesticides, better for our health. Just the list goes on. Because when you use all that land, you're throwing all those poisons. Don't just think that, okay, if we spread out into the countryside and build cities and suburbs, that's horrible for the environment, because agriculture can have a lot of negative impacts too. But here's the really kicker. If there's not going to be so much of a need to grow food in the rural areas and transport them, this is going to have a lot of effect on population and jobs. Maybe we can see a lot of ghost towns all across the rural areas across the world. Now, wait a second. Maybe, I don't know, some of those small towns, maybe places where people just want to get away, have some quiet time, get away from the corruption. People can just sit there and work at home. There could be a lot of different changes. And of course, rural areas are perhaps needed for mines, for other types of resources. So there's still going to perhaps be towns across the state of Nevada. But then again, the question is, why should we grow food hundreds and thousands of miles away? Especially here in Las Vegas. They've already started it. If you want to sell food at the casinos, you serve food at the buffets, why not grow it just a few steps away? Because seriously, hardly any food in the Las Vegas Valley comes within 100 miles away. And by the way, this is one of the reasons why people don't like to live in Vegas, because there's a lack of true farmers markets. You could see here how hydroponics is growing. They believe that isolation for pets, and they can grow, more importantly, in a wide range of latitudes. So we really don't have to depend on growing food in certain parts of the world or the country, because we can't grow certain things in North Dakota, Chicago, or perhaps in Texas. And hopefully we can also produce proteins, meats, dairy products, grains that can fill our stomach. We don't have to necessarily be vulnerable for droughts, a whole lot of different things. Not to mention we will consume far less water. Because a lot of people are saying, well, Cyrus, you want to build things on the outskirts of Las Vegas. Where's the water going to come from? First of all, we can use water conservation techniques. California and Arizona can rely more on desalination, but remember, a lot of the water, because we're having a growing water concern in the Colorado River, actually goes to agriculture, especially in the farms in the Imperial Valley. This is a transect that a lot of these so-called anti-sprawl critics are talking about. You can see here. Notice how the street layout and the buildings is substantially much different. There's a special district, urban core, urban center. You have some row houses, detached homes, lots of space. You have some areas where certain things are permitted and not. You can have a bicycle activities, passageway, alleys. Certain areas will have roads, certain areas will have streets. Certain areas will have highways. So like I've talked about before, we have to make this very flexible. And again, it's not just the fact that, particularly in the suburban areas that are having problems with their strip malls and their office parks because there's a less need of them, indoor shopping malls, but even parking is starting to figure out a lot of disruptions. It's not just the fact that, remember, a lot of these vast parking lots exist primarily due to the fact that, well, they're mandated, there's parking minimums. Keep in mind, though, that the Raiders Stadium, they were able to keep their minimums exempt. You see conflict of interest. But anyway, they point out with the growing rideshare programs, the growing trend of people realizing that there's a large amount of public and private costs with the automobile. But more importantly, when you look at autonomous vehicles and scooters, believe it or not, a lot of these vehicles can be one-seater because you're really just going by yourself. They drop you off, they pick up the next person. What is the need of having all these parking structures? And not to mention all the ticketing, finding a space. It's just very, very ugly. And could we use these parking structures to convert them to vertical farms, apartment housing? Because again, we have literally a shortage of vehicle. Now, again, it is very, very difficult to understand that everybody's going to give up their cars and, their own private vehicles, and we're going to use obviously shared vehicles. It's not easy for me to see that. I'm preparing the neighborhoods I'm designing to make sure that it's going to be flexible, unlike the system we have, which is really going to be dysfunctional in the coming years. I would assume that Manhattan and Paris is more ready for this future, but you can see how there's a lot of costs associated with parking. It just goes on and on and on. A parking garage is going to be converted into shops and apartments. We also have an addiction. People are just still glued with their cars. It's just a lot of different costs. And as we begin to see, we're seeing changes. More people are being dependent on government handouts with unemployment. A lot of people argue we're moving to basic income, so that will reduce the need of car ownership. Because people ask, how can you live with just $1,000 a month? Well, the answer is, and we've talked about in the previous videos, of automated construction, which will reduce the cost of housing. This will make sure that if we get basic income or something, that people can just move by very, very easily. But other than that, this is just a very, very ugly eyesore. Now, this is an organization I've known for about 13 years or so, Congress of New Urbanism. They talk about how they're doing all these retrofits, transit-oriented development. They're doing alternative to the outskirt development. You can see all here. Now, don't get me wrong, we may have pretty similar views, but I have a lot of disagreements with them. One of the things about these guys is that they promote peak oil and climate change, which these are claims that a lot of people don't agree with, and a lot of people are not comfortable talking about. I've seen statistics that debunk these claims. They also seek for federal intervention. I've heard this administration wants to do what they can to get people out of their cars. I'm not for it. I'm not for federal intervention. I'm for encouraging people to do so, incentivizing, not pressuring people like that. They also are for urban growth boundaries, regional agencies, as you can see here. I'm not for that. I believe I should create my own product that will compete with the status quo. I don't agree with some of the ways they plan their neighborhoods. I'm mainly focused on the outskirts. And a lot of these organizations, they've been accused of being folks that have intervention of the UN, Agenda 21. Now, again, I don't think all these people are tyrants. I think most of these people want to bring back traditional cities, but I think that some of these organizations have been co-opted and hijacked with these elements, and that's what's really happening. It's kind of like renewable energy. Yeah, I do think we can implement renewable energy, but the ones that they're giving us, like the transit system, like the California high-speed rail, it's a joke alternative that essentially wastes money and perpetuates the status quo. There's a lot of articles that's been talked about how they want to scrape the cul-de-sac. Again, the main concern is the street layout and the land use pattern. It's not so much whether you have low rise or high rise or low density or high density. This is what's really the concern. This is the plan in Philadelphia. Again, a lot of us want to go back to the more old-fashioned system. You can see here, the pandemic leaves suburbanites isolated and a lack of public spaces. This is one of the things. It's like you're sitting home, stay at home, working at home. People want to get out. They want to explore. They want to see cafes, live entertainment, get to know their neighbors. This neighborhood in Texas back in 2017 planned via Laredo, kudos to them. They're not a fan of the sprawl and they want to bring back grid streets. And this is something that, by the way, Las Vegas can certainly learn. There's no question about it. If you really want to spread these ideas, I suggest give them your content on Transform Clark County. I've talked about it. I've brought these issues very carefully, and it's definitely very important to know that we bring these ideas forward. This is a little off-topic question, but you can see there are a lot of dirty money in our state legislatures. I just want you to take note of this article. Let me give you some examples of what really the problem is. You can see here, this is again, all the cul-de-sacs, different types of land uses, very difficult to get around. So this system means that you can have a more interconnected street system. This is a large apartment complex, large block of zoning, multi-acreage, 2-story buildings. This is in Flamingo and Decatur. So if you live here, there's only one way to get out. So you have to travel 1/2 mile east for what? It's just ridiculous. And it's a guard-gated neighborhood, and they easily let people in. All this useless separation for what? And look at this, nearly all of these housing units are multifamily, and it's still fairly car dependent. It's probably the obvious reason why Las Vegas is among the worst urban planning. Please share this video to the local authorities. This is a really close together, tiny lot, detached housing unit. It's guard gated. It's in Irvine, California. They waste their valuable remaining land into all this nonsense load of crap. Seriously. And it's very car dependent, unlike Charleston, which you have homes that are similar in that size, which are very pedestrian friendly. And also Balboa Island, which I will show you. You see this load of nonsense also here in the Summerlin neighborhood, Sahara and I-215. And look at this. This is downtown Summerlin. So these folks cannot easily walk to downtown Summerlin to get their basic necessities. There's a Trader Joe's. Now, why is that? This is guard gated too. You can see here, they have an alleyway too. There's some level of pedestrian activity that attracts because there's a passageway, there's a neighborhood pool, but there's only one way you can get in and out. It's just ridiculous. I'm gonna have to do more signs and some form of promotion to expose this horrible, dysfunctional system. This is Rhodes Ranch. There's only 2 ways you can get in and out. It's just absolutely unbelievable. And there's a lot of traffic going on. I've done a lot of videos about this. And then this is how they surround their neighborhoods, the walls. You can easily get in and out. It's ridiculous. This is a neighborhood close to where I live. You can see here, this is a single family home, a 7-Eleven. So you have to go all the way around here to get your basic necessities. They can't even lay out these neighborhoods like here. This is a neighborhood east of Summerlin. You can see here, they have these nice passageways. The garage is on the other side of the front door, but once again, you only have very few entrances and exits. It's absolutely unbelievable. Look at how these homes are all very close together. They hardly have any fences, very little privacy. This is here in Las Vegas. Look at this. It's a joke. I've protested against these homes. They're 3-story. They look like storage sheds. They look like office buildings. I don't know. And by the way, this is those homes were gated. This is a better alternative. These are 3 stories, very similar floor plans, but it's easy to walk around and they have so much more charm and beauty. This is in St. Louis, Second Empire style. Now this is the high density we can certainly build, more like this. Spanish colonial revival. Look at all these high quality details, windows, doors. It's just beautiful. This is in Santa Monica, California. Not too far from Irvine, from that example I showed you, this is Balboa Island. Interconnected streets. Garage is in the other side of the front door. Shopping is relatively close and is sized very similarly from the detached homes. And nearly all of these housing units are practically detached, unlike the apartment complexes I showed you in Las Vegas. Again, this debunks the myth that you need to be stacked on top of each other to get pedestrian friendly, a high level of connectivity, and to get a more transit-oriented lifestyle. This, you can see here, this isn't showing very too well because of Google. This is a very car-dependent, land-use segregated system in an area outside of Xi'an, China. This is no wonder why they have so much traffic. But you can see all these dead-end streets, these large complexes. This is what they call vertical sprawl, high-density sprawl. This is another example. You can see here they have places to go to school, shop, live, work, different types of housing units. But this one, the land use is more segregated. Streets don't interconnect. This one does. This is more traditional. This is obviously an example I've showed you in Irvine, California. You can see here, very car dependent. There's hardly any single family homes, and the land uses are very segregated. Lots of traffic congestion. This is probably one of the worst you can see. This is in a neighborhood north of downtown San Diego. It's very similar, son of a gun. So there you have it, folks. This is just to show you that people are saying, oh, we're leaving the cities and we want to go to the suburbs, but the suburbs don't necessarily have to be more of the problems that we've been having for many, many decades. It's important for you to make sure that you spread this information, and we also make sure that when we grow on the outskirts, that we do a better job. And I know there's a lot of corruption happening nowadays. The establishment is panicking from what I've heard, but when we experience a golden age, not just in society, but also in beauty, a renaissance. Thank you guys so much. If you like these videos, please share and subscribe. Didn't mean to go so long.